you then at one stage felt a very strong call from God to hit the road.
Yes.
Which is very well known nationally and internationally today as the Foot Washer Ministry. You kind of started up in Pretoria. I remember the day that you were launched with a big joy clap and singing and a prayer. And there you went, walking from Pretoria all the way around to Cape Town. And what was going to be a week or two ended up still walking from time to time, washing the feet of people and sharing the servant love of Jesus. And that's a discussion for a whole other day. Love to talk to you about the call, the response, and the dynamics in and around it. But what was interesting in that time, you also carried not just the conviction of that call from God, but the heart of who Church of the Nations was, that many of us, or many of the churches, came in through a direct friendship and relationship with you. Tell us a bit about that.
It was wonderful because, just as you say, it's a big discussion for another time, but really felt that in the hurt that was going on in our nation at the time under apartheid and those kind of things, that people were suffering. And although we had soup kitchens and all these other nice little feeding schemes and things that we did, I just felt the church wasn't being relevant. And God arrested my heart, and it was a process of 14 months as I waited on God. And I really just felt Him call to say that we should go out and begin to make a prophetic statement of the servant love of Jesus. In that, carrying the heart of Church of the Nations and understanding that we weren't ones who were apart from, but that we were ones that were a part of, that were sent. And so we started on the rioting streets of Soweto, and then moved up to Pretoria, and then began a 3,500 kilometer journey through, which would take us through Natal and down the east coast and the west coast, the east coast and the southern tip toward Cape Town. And you say it quickly, but it took 2.5 years. As you said, we thought it would take 6 months. I asked the elders at Robin Hills if we could have, if we could be sent for 6 months. We felt that's how long it would take. I think it's just under 30 years now, and we're still going. It has taken us to the nations of the streets of more than 30 nations. But we found as we started to go, two things, and you were very much part of this, Louis, in that very often within the leadership of Cotton, the guys would challenge me, and you would be one of them, to say, what are you? And I would say, I am a pastor who is sent. And for years we wrestled with that. And the guys would say, no, Dave, we think you're an evangelist. And I noticed, and the one thing that I totally underestimated when I started on the streets of Soweto, and it was burning and there were riots and all sorts of things, was the work of the Holy Spirit. As we would go, we would just suddenly see people begin to get saved. I saw that when I preached, people got saved. And somehow there was that value within us that as we met people and as we went, we saw churches begin to spring up, or people would come and say, Dave, tell us about this value system, this family that you're part of. And as you know, Louis, in those days, I think there were 3 churches, and we'd gone through a crisis. And I think Tony had said, can you look after these 3 churches? And I think I grew the 3 churches to 2 in 6 months. And then suddenly we began to find that people wanted the values and the principles and the ethos and those things that were in our heart. And we saw churches being added, and I think within about 5 years we'd grown to about 40 churches.
Phenomenal.
Just here, not knowing that God would take us elsewhere, and that would continue to happen in other parts of the world. And so that was very much the journey. And a lot of it has grown into what we are in Church of the Nations today. And it was in those early days, the very, very early days, in fact, before I started on the road, that I met you.
Yes.
And I remember the preciousness of the relationship. And one of the things we always talk about in Church of the Nations is that people who are added to one another have to have a chemistry. And I remember the day I met you. You always joke with me, and you can tell me that you remember what I was wearing the day we met. I think Louis was about 24 or 25 years old. I probably wasn't a whole lot older myself. I think I was in my mid-30s and maybe 35, 36. And God just knit our hearts. And it was just a precious thing with Edna to have that added as well. I think at that point in time, I think you just had Jana,
Mikhail.
Mikhail, and it was lovely to see all your other children being born, and those relationships formed at the
Yeah.
very early days
Yeah.
as we began to journey together.
Yeah.
So it's
It's phenomenal, isn't it?
it's a phenomenal journey.